March 8, 1965, the Marines of the 9th Battalion went ashore and went about the business of taking control of the Da Nang Air Base. The Marines had landed at last, and true to form, they were the first ground combat forces to deploy to South Vietnam. Among them was a young lieutenant from Louisville, Kentucky.
Once having shipped out to Da Nang, we were put in charge of the basically security around the airport, just in order to basically accustomize ourselves to the climate and what was going on.
The infantry battalions immediately deployed among the high ridges surrounding the Da Nang airfield.
After leaving the airfield, we moved out south of Da Nang to the area of Hill 55, not on Hill 55, but off to the, could be the east of Hill 55. And we set up a camp, a perimeter there, and sent squad-sized patrols out of there.
Leathernecks began to exchange gunfire with the Viet Cong almost immediately.
I'll never forget the first time that we went out as a platoon. I was standing talking with another Marine officer, and I noticed dust kicking up between my legs. And it was followed by a real sharp whack. And I thought, well, son of a bitch, somebody's shooting at me. And by golly, they were. And that was bullets hitting around us from sniper fire.
Dietrich reacted to the enemy fire like a well-trained veteran.
I got down, got under cover, pulled out a candle, lit it up. So this is what getting shot at is all about.
The first Marine casualties from those early exchanges made headlines back in the States.
It's a casualty of war. You hate to see it happen. You hate to see it happen to a young Marine. You know, he had a mother and a daddy.
Nobody knew at the time that the 9th Battalion's KIA would be the first of many, the first in a war to last another decade. The devil dogs of Nam did not cower in the face of imminent danger. They did what Marines had always done, complete the job as efficiently as possible and stay alive.
I had thought, prior to going to Vietnam, we were sailing on the ship going over, you know. And I told my platoon, I said, I've never been shot at before. I don't know how I'm going to react. And I know none of you have either. And I'll take it a day at a time and hope that I'm the leader that you expect me to be and try to bring you home safely 13 months from now.
They did it for one reason.
I always considered it to be truly the most noble of public services, above and beyond a police officer, above and beyond a politician, above and beyond anything that I could think of, was the business of laying your life on the line for your country, for your fellow human beings. And that sounds like noble nonsense, but it's something I've always felt and believed.
The next 10 years would test the resolve of every Marine, from the infantrymen to the commanding general. Throughout July 1965, Marine intelligence in Chu Lai reported a large Viet Cong buildup in the Van Tung Peninsula. Chu Lai was initially just a wide stretch in the sandy scrub, dangerously surrounded by high ground. 25 days after the Marines arrived, they had built an airfield at Chu Lai, complete with carrier-like catapults and arresting cables. From that field, deadly Marine A-4 Skyhawks were roaring aloft to provide close air support to Marine ground operations. Within weeks, Marines were engaging in hot firefights with the shadowy men in black pajamas who fired AK-47 assault rifles and RPG-7 rocket launchers with authority.
Many times in Vietnam, the enemy was elusive because unless it was a set, staged battle, you had 2 or 3 snipers off in a tree line and they'd shoot and move on. You would attack the tree line and very rarely found anything at all. Or ever so often you may find some blood trails, but hardly any bodies.
The Leathernecks invariably prevailed in this shadow war, but always at a cost. At the 90-day mark after landings, the Marines had sustained 209 casualties, including 29 dead. Having VC in such close proximity to the Chu Lai Air Base became a serious concern for the Marines. The Marines decided they won't wait for the enemy to make the next move. Operation Starlight turned another corner in the war for the young warriors. In a snatch-and-grab operation by American-trained ARVN forces on August 15, 1965, a soldier from the 1st VC Regiment was taken and interrogated. The Marines learned from their prisoner that the VC Regiment in the Van Tung Peninsula had over 1,500 men strong, with additional supporting units nearby. This powerful force planned to attack the Chu Lai airstrip from a Van Tong village complex they had established as a base of operations. General Lewis William Walt, commander of the 3rd Marine Amphibious Force in Vietnam, didn't want to wait around to find out if the VC soldier was telling the truth. Within 48 hours, General Walt and his advisors put together an attack plan to wipe out the VC regiment at Van Tong. 2 Marine battalions were involved. Before dawn on D-Day, August 18th, Operation Starlight began. It was the first offensive military action conducted by a purely U.S. military unit during the Vietnam War. Eager Marines, vets of Korea and combat cherries alike, made an amphibious landing southeast of Van Tung and set up a blocking position.
In August of that year, or may have been late July of that year, we went aboard ship off of Okinawa and headed down to the South China Sea. Ended up going into the Batangan Peninsula on an operation called Starlight in Vietnam, which was the first combat landing, and got shot at my first time in there.
15mm artillery shells slammed into the village complexes of Van Tung. While artillery shells pummeled the VC installations, 20 Marine A-4 Skyhawks and F-4 Phantoms screamed overhead.
I was impressed with the firepower we had at that time. I can't even remember what they called it now. They put some type of a Gatling gun in a C-130 and fly over your area and just obliterate it, you know. Or to sit there and watch the F-4 Phantoms come in and do their bombing runs. The artillery support that we got, which I was never at, you know, I was always out in the field calling for artillery. I never saw where they were or what they ate. The only thing I knew was when I called, they said, it's on the way, and put it on the spot that we needed it.
Gallons of napalm and thousands of bombs saturated the area. The earth shook, and the skies were red and black with fire and smoke. This was all part of the teamwork approach to battle that the Marines had developed in 1930.
The Marine Corps Air Ground Team, where you're taking that one Marine that's on the ground with a rifle in his hand, everything else out there is supporting him. The Marine Corps Air, Marine Corps Artillery, Marine Corps Engineers, the mortars that you had attached to your platoon was all in support of that one rifleman.
Aboard LSTs just offshore at Green Beach, heavy machine guns provided cover fire for Marine Companies I, K, and 3rd of the 3rd.
It was an amphibious landing. We landed via helicopters and landing craft, LVTs, Amtraks, came in and hit the beach, advanced into a hedgerow. We were under modicum of fire at that point. But when we hit the hedgerows, in my particular case, the fire became very heavy, and it got interesting. It got hairy. I was in an area where several gentlemen jumped into the trench and shot up some people and kept us moving through those hedgerows. It was a confusing time, a time that I began to understand the fog of war, how things don't go exactly as they're planned. And when the first round goes down range, why the first plan goes into the camp, into the dumper. You know, it's an interesting deal. And frankly, I remember less about it and know less about it than later when I went back to Vietnam in 67, 68, 69, and 70. Those were the years that I think were really where I reached my maturity as a soldier.
Less than 2 hours into Operation Starlight, things were going well. Inland, the pulsating rhythm of helicopter rotors announced the arrival of other Marine companies. Lieutenant Colonel Joseph R. Fisher jumped from a helicopter at LZ White. At about the same time, Company H alighted at LZ Blue north of Van Tung. The Marine blockade around Van Tung was in place. The Marines believed they would be in Van Tung the following morning, but the Marines were falling into a VC trap, and the trap was about to be sprung. When the Marines launched Operation Starlight, they expected the VC to do what the guerrillas had always done, fade into the jungle. This time, the Viet Cong held their ground and fought. The Van Tung Peninsula was their regimental command post, their home.
The purpose of that operation was simply to close with the Viet Cong, to wipe them out of an area where they were threatening some of the population centers. That was always the Marine Corps' way of looking at this thing. It was the business of protecting the people in the hamlets, the large population centers, from communist incursion. We were down near the Tam Kỳ, Chu Lai area, and those were major population centers, and the idea was to close with and contact the Viet Cong who were threatening those particular population centers.
Caves and spider holes laced the countryside. Many of the small villages were heavily fortified. A battalion commander described the hamlet of Van Tung as encircled with trench line and double-apron barbed wire fence. The streets had punji traps for personnel and vehicles, as well as spider traps. The Marines making the helicopter landings began to encounter resistance as they searched two hamlets near their landing zone. The Marines landed to the west of the enemy positions. From there, they planned on driving the enemy into the sea. This worked in one sector, where 100 VC poured out of the tree line onto the beach. They attempted to escape by sampans. The destroyer Orlek opened up her 5-inch guns with relish. In other sectors, the fighting broke down into localized brawls between small units, the VC maximizing their dug-in positions. The Marines of Company E were forced to take cover on nearby hillsides. After a few minutes, they rose up as one man and advanced at a snail's pace. Slowly, they fought their way uphill with the fire of M14 rifles and M60 machine guns leading the charge. Finally, after hours of relentless fighting, the Viet Cong broke contact. U.S. casualties were medevaced out, and the company resumed its northeast advance up the hillside. Meanwhile, along the coast, Company K had advanced and held the position at Phase Line Banana. At sunset, the Marines dug in for the night. On the high ground between the unsuspecting Marines of Company K and the Van Tung Peninsula, a communist force was hiding and waiting for the ideal opportunity to strike. They won't have long to wait. One Force Recon Marine remembered the attack on the company's position his team had selected to get a little sleep before going back into the hills.
And we had just got to sleep and all hell broke loose. They had a human wave. I forget how many NVA hit that unit. They have one guy with a satchel charge jump on the concertina and blow a hole in it. And they'd run up and jump on them 155s and blow them up.
This was a battle without any lines. The enemy had broken into the Marine base, and death was everywhere.
Well, the guy across from me said, "Look at that." We're all hunkered up, and there was a Marine standing on his bunker with an M60 machine gun, the guy feeding it, and he was firing back into the compound. We thought, oh my God, because they're not 100 yards away from him, the other bunkers, because you set up on a 360.
The Leathernecks threw everything they had into the fight.
Well, somebody come crawling out of that command post and said, "Who's in charge here?" And Lieutenant Lee said, "I am." He said, "They need you all down there somewhere, da 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 da." I thought, oh my God, we got to get out here in this stuff. And then we looked and we could see the NVA running through the compound. But none of us would shoot knowing there was Marines on the other side of them.
Danny Pyler's team decided to move to a better position before returning fire.
Well, we were crawling. We crawled as fast as we could crawl, and all of a sudden I remember a big light going up in front of me, and it got the first 4 of us. The first guy was killed, and the 3 of us got wounded. The lieutenant put us in a foxhole with these grunts.
The battle lasted from the early morning to late afternoon. Finally, the enemy was beaten back. The Marines had held their ground. The 2 Marine assault battalions found themselves straddled around an area known as Landing Zone Blue, or LZB. LZB was surrounded by 3 hamlets. To the north, An Toi, Nam Yen on the south, and to the east was An Chong. Besides an enemy of cunning ability, the terrain surrounding them proved to be a formidable obstacle for the Marines around LZB. The area was nothing more than a series of rice paddies, jungle streams, and hedgerows. It was a twisted maze of jungle and uncertainty. LZB sat between Hill 43 and Nam Yen. The Marines set out to take this area, believing it to be an ideal spot to set up defense. Unfortunately, the 60th VC Battalion already occupied the area. The Marines soon found themselves fighting a savage battle for control of LZB. Initially, the VC force was caught by surprise as the first incoming Marine UH-34 helicopters flew overhead. The UH-34s dropped their loads and flew back to Chu Lai unscathed. On the following nights, helicopters would not be so lucky. From machine gun positions on Hill 43, the VC sprayed the UH-34s with a barrage of bullets. The chopper's thin aluminum skin offered little resistance to the heavy slugs fired by the enemy. The firing was so intense that one helicopter pilot later remarked, "You just had to close your eyes and drop down to the deck." Not yet fully aware of what he faced, Company Commander 1st Lieutenant Homer K. Jenkins sent 1 platoon to eliminate the VC on Hill 43, thereby giving the helicopters a chance to maneuver in the area. But the VC were too well entrenched in the area for the platoon to push them off the hill. As the platoon regrouped, Jenkins called air support from the Phantom F-4s. Hill 43 and surrounding villages were bombed in order to clear the way for the Marines to take the area from the VC. After the air raid, 3 Marine platoons met the VC in a fight that became an all-out bloodbath. As Marines moved up the hill, the VC let loose with a hail of small arms fire, forcing the Marines to take cover. There was little cover to be found. With no place to hide, the Marines pushed on. The Marines' charge surprised the VC, and they finally broke. But the fight was not over yet. Along Green Beach, southeast of Van Tung, Captain Bruce D. Webb advanced his Marines northward along the streambed until they reached a point opposite An Chung. Once the Marines reached An Chung, they, like the Marines on Hill 43, met a formidable enemy force. Charlie cut through the company's ranks with heavy machine gun fire, that abruptly halted their advance. The VC had turned An Chung into an ideal stronghold by constructing a vast network of tunnels under the surrounding jungle. The Marines swept into the village and searched for the enemy, hut by hut. More than 50 VC were killed in the action at An Chung. In the meantime, Lieutenant Jenkins moved his Marines from Hill 43 to An Chung to link up with Company I, who had just taken that area from the VC. While en route to An Chung, Jenkins made the mistake of bypassing Nam Yen to the east, believing that Company I had cleared it too. The unfortunate truth was that Charlie was still at home. The enemy in Nam Yen and on Hill 30 pounded the young Marines with small arms and mortar fire. The savage fire cut down 5 men in the lead platoon. Desperate calls to corpsmen from wounded Marines echoed throughout the battlefield, but the corpsmen were prevented from helping the wounded by Viet Cong fire until nightfall. The next day, the Marines encountered pockets of stiff resistance as they continued their advance across the rugged terrain and through the hostile villages. Nonetheless, the Marines fought onward, and late in the morning of the 19th of August, Companies E and G had linked up with other Marine units near Van Tung. The combined force then swept the rest of the peninsula. Organized enemy resistance on Phoc Ton Peninsula had ceased. The battle had raged for 6 days. In the end, the Marines counted 641 dead VC, a huge bag, at the cost of 203 wounded and 45 killed of their own. 2 Marines received the Medal of Honor during the operation.
Well, it disabused me of some of the romance of military service. It disabused me of the business of how grand and glorious soldiering can be. It was a tough thing, but I think it was, to me, the supreme test. It was what I was designed to do. And I realized that later, once I was through dealing with the immediacy of staying alive and so on and so forth. I thought that, well, this is what you bought into. This is what you wanted. This is the reality of it, unromantic as it may be in its reality. It is what you bought into, and what do you think? And what I thought was, yes, I can do this, and this is what I was born to do.
At the time, Starlight seemed a significant tactical victory. The Marines had surprised and soundly whipped a main Viet Cong regiment, inflicting disproportionate fatalities at the rate of 14 to 1. The United States, it seemed, could prevail over the communist guerrillas, where the Japanese and French had so badly failed. They were wrong. But the VC learned to respect the Americans' immense firepower. Never again would the Viet Cong force fight a pitched battle against Marine regiments. The VC would revert to their shadow war, stinging the Marines in 1,000 small attacks and ambushes. The bigger engagements were now left to their better armed brethren, the People's Army of North Vietnam, the NVA.